The sound of metal scraping against frozen earth pulled me from sleep at exactly 3:17 a.m. For a moment, I lay there in our king-sized bed, disoriented, wondering if I'd dreamed it. Then I heard it again. Rhythmic, deliberate, the unmistakable sound of a shovel breaking through soil. I turned to Richard's side of the bed. Empty. The sheets were cold. My heart began to race as I pushed myself up and walked to the window overlooking our backyard. What I saw made my blood run cold. There was my husband of 26 years, illuminated by the motion sensor light he'd triggered, digging a hole in the center of our carefully maintained lawn. He was still wearing the gray army t-shirt and sweatpants he'd gone to bed in, his breath visible in the November cold, and he was digging with a focus I recognized from his military days. Systematic, precise, relentless. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand with trembling hands. I don't know why my first instinct was to film him. Maybe it was the hospital administrator in me, trained to document everything. Maybe it was the wife who'd watched her husband transform into a stranger over the past 11 days and needed proof that she wasn't losing her mind. I pressed record and held the phone up to the window, zooming in as much as the camera would allow. The hole was already waist deep. I could see the measurements clearly from my vantage point on the second floor, approximately 6 feet long, maybe 3 feet wide. My throat constricted. Those were grave dimensions. I'd worked in hospitals long enough to know exactly what a grave looked like, and my husband was digging one in our backyard at 3 in the morning. I watched through that window for 43 minutes. I know, because I kept checking the timestamp on my phone, watching the numbers change, while my husband dug deeper and deeper into the Kentucky bluegrass lawn we'd spent $4,000 having professionally installed 3 years ago. My breath kept fogging up the glass, and I'd wipe it away with my sleeve, unable to look away, unable to process what I was witnessing. Richard climbed out of the hole at 4 a.m. exactly. He was breathing hard, his shoulders heaving, and he stood there for a moment looking down at what he'd created. Then he turned and walked toward our garden shed, the one he'd insisted on building himself when we first moved into this house 18 years ago, the one he always kept padlocked, the one I'd never questioned because every man deserves his private space. He emerged from the shed dragging something heavy. Even from the second-floor window, I could see it clearly, something wrapped in black plastic sheeting, secured with what looked like duct tape, cylindrical in shape, roughly the size of a large duffel bag. The way he handled it, the way he braced his legs and used his core strength to maneuver it across the lawn, told me it weighed at least 150 pounds. Maybe more. My hand was shaking so violently I almost dropped the phone. I watched my husband, the man who'd survived 3 tours in some of the most dangerous places on earth, the man who'd held me on our wedding night and promised to protect me always, the man I'd built an entire life with, lower that black-wrapped package into the hole with the same careful precision he'd once used to defuse improvised explosive devices in Fallujah. He climbed down into the hole himself then, arranging the package, positioning it just so. When he climbed back out, he began filling the hole with the same methodical efficiency he'd used to dig it. Shovelful after shovelful, the black plastic disappeared beneath the earth. He worked steadily for another 20 minutes, and when the hole was completely filled, he did something that made my stomach turn. He replaced the sod he'd carefully removed and set aside, patting it down, smoothing it, making sure the seams were invisible. Someone who didn't know our yard intimately would never guess the ground had been disturbed. Richard picked up the shovel and walked back toward the shed. I heard the padlock click shut. Then he walked into our house through the back door. I heard his footsteps on the stairs, heavy and tired. I dove back into bed, pulling the covers up, closing my eyes, forcing my breathing to slow. The bedroom door opened. I felt him standing there, and I kept my eyes squeezed shut, kept my breathing even, prayed he couldn't hear my heart hammering against my ribs. The bathroom door closed, the shower turned on, and it stayed on. I lay there listening to water running for what felt like an eternity. When I finally checked my phone again, it was 5:43 a.m. Richard had been in that shower for over an hour, and I understood with chilling clarity that he was scrubbing something off himself, washing away evidence of whatever he'd just done. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I lay there as dawn broke through our curtains, as the sky shifted from black to gray to pale pink, as normal Sunday morning sounds began filtering through our neighborhood. Dogs barking, cars starting, the distant church bells from St. Catherine's 3 blocks away. Richard finally emerged from the bathroom at 6:15 a.m., his skin red from the hot water, wearing fresh clothes. He looked at me, and for just a moment something flickered across his face. Fear? Guilt? Relief that I was still asleep? "Morning," he said, his voice hoarse. I forced my eyes open, as if I'd just woken up, forced a sleepy smile. "Morning. You're up early. Couldn't sleep. Went for a walk." The lie came so easily, I almost believed it myself. "It's freezing out there," I said, keeping my voice light, normal, the voice of a wife making casual morning conversation with her husband. "Yeah." Helps clear my head. He walked to his dresser, pulled out socks, wouldn't meet my eyes. I wanted to scream. I wanted to demand answers. I wanted to show him the video on my phone. 43 minutes of evidence that he hadn't gone for a walk, that he'd buried something in our backyard, that the man I'd married had brought something dark and terrible into our home. But I didn't, because in that moment, looking at Richard's rigid back, at the tension in his shoulders, at the way his hands trembled slightly as he pulled on his socks, I realized I was afraid of my own husband. "I'm going to make coffee," I said, swinging my legs out of bed. "I'll be down in a minute." I walked downstairs on shaking legs, made coffee I couldn't taste, sat at our kitchen table staring out at the backyard. In the morning light, the lawn looked perfect, undisturbed, beautiful. If I hadn't watched it happen, if I didn't have video evidence on my phone, I would never have believed someone had dug a 6-foot hole there just hours ago. Richard came down 15 minutes later, poured himself coffee, sat across from me. We'd shared breakfast at this table for 18 years, and suddenly it felt like I was sitting across from a stranger. "Helen," he said quietly, and something in his tone made me look up. His green eyes, the eyes I'd fallen in love with 26 years ago when I was 29 and he was 32 and the world still made sense, were haunted. "If something happens to me, I need you to know I did what I thought was right." My coffee cup froze halfway to my lips. "What are you talking about? What's going to happen to you?" "Nothing. Probably nothing." But his voice said otherwise. "I just need you to know that. Whatever you hear, whatever people say, I did what I thought was right. Richard, you're scaring me. I'm sorry." He reached across the table and took my hand, and his fingers were ice cold. "I never wanted to scare you. I never wanted any of this to touch you." "Any of what? What are you talking about?" But he just shook his head and pulled his hand away. "I need to run some errands today. I'll be back this afternoon." He left the house at 8:30 a.m., and I watched him drive away in his Ford F-150, the truck he'd bought 2 years ago with deployment pay. The moment his taillights disappeared around the corner, I ran upstairs and grabbed my phone, transferred the video to my laptop, my cloud storage, 3 different backup locations. Whatever I'd filmed, whatever Richard had buried in our backyard, I needed that evidence protected. The rest of Sunday passed in a blur of normalcy that felt obscene. Richard came home at 4 p.m. with groceries. He'd gone shopping, he said, like this was a normal Sunday, like he hadn't buried something the size and weight of a human body in our backyard 12 hours earlier. We made dinner together, grilled chicken and roasted vegetables, stood side by side at the stove the way we'd done thousands of times. We watched a movie, some action thriller Richard picked that I couldn't follow. We went to bed at 10:30 p.m., and he fell asleep within minutes while I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Monday came. I went to work at St. Mary's Regional Hospital, where I'd been vice president of operations for 7 years, sat through budget meetings and staff reviews, smiled and nodded and approved requisitions while my mind was 3 miles away in my backyard, wondering what was buried beneath that perfect lawn. Tuesday was the same. Wednesday was the same. And then, on Thursday morning, I woke up at 6 a.m. and smelled it. Sweet, nauseating, unmistakable. The smell was coming through our bedroom floor, seeping up from the ground below, and I knew that smell. I'd worked in hospitals for 32 years. I'd been in morgues, in trauma rooms, in hospice wards. I knew the smell of decomposition, of organic matter breaking down, of death. Something was rotting in our backyard. And my husband, my Richard, the man sleeping peacefully beside me, had put it there. I need to go back to understand how we arrived at this nightmare. I need to explain who Richard was before that third deployment, before the silence, before the 3 a.m. burial that shattered everything I thought I knew about my marriage. Richard Mason and I met in September of 1999 at a hospital fundraiser in Lexington, Kentucky. I was 29 years old, working as an assistant hospital administrator at St. Mary's Regional, climbing my way up through sheer determination and 80-hour work weeks. He was 32, an Army Ranger on leave, attending the event because his mother had been treated at St. Mary's for breast cancer the year before. He was standing alone near the silent auction tables, looking uncomfortable in his dress uniform, and when our eyes met across the room, something just clicked. We were married within a year. It was fast, maybe too fast by conventional standards, but there was something about Richard that made me feel safe in a way I'd never experienced before. He had this quiet strength, this unshakable integrity that radiated from him. He didn't need to dominate a room or prove himself. He simply was, solid, dependable, honorable. His fellow Rangers called him Mason the Righteous because he refused to cut corners, refused to compromise his principles even when it would have been easier. We built a beautiful life together. We bought this house in 2007, a 4-bedroom colonial in Ashland Hills, one of those neighborhoods where children still played in cul-de-sacs and people knew their neighbors' names. Richard deployed twice in our first 15 years of marriage. Once to Iraq in 2003, 14 months that aged me a decade, and again to Afghanistan in 2011, 9 months that I survived by throwing myself into work. Both times he came home different, quieter, carrying weight he wouldn't share. But he was still fundamentally Richard, still the man who left me notes on the bathroom mirror, who remembered our anniversary, who would sit with me on the porch swing on summer evenings talking about the future we'd build together. We never had children. It wasn't a choice exactly, more like something we kept postponing until suddenly I was 45 and Richard was 48 and the window had closed. I told myself I was fine with it. My career was demanding, fulfilling. I'd risen to vice president of operations, overseeing a staff of 300, managing a $40 million annual budget. Richard had his Army career, his Ranger brothers, his sense of purpose. We had each other, and for 24 years, that had been enough. Then came the third deployment. Richard was 54 years old, technically past the age when most Rangers took field assignments. He'd been working stateside for 3 years, training new recruits at Fort Benning, coming home every weekend. It was the most stable our life had been since we married. We'd started talking seriously about his retirement, about traveling together, about maybe buying that cabin in Montana we'd always dreamed of. In March of this year, Richard came home from base with news. There was a special assignment, he said. Advisory role, training mission, working with NATO forces in Romania. Nothing dangerous, purely educational. They specifically wanted experienced Rangers to share tactical knowledge. It would be 6 months, decent pay, and it would look excellent on his record before retirement. The Army was asking, but not ordering. The choice was his. I didn't want him to go. I was 55 years old, and I was tired of being a military wife, tired of sleeping alone, tired of holding my breath every time the news reported casualties. But I saw something in Richard's eyes when he talked about it. A need, almost desperate, to prove he still had value, that he wasn't just some aging warrior being put out to pasture. So I said yes. I supported his decision. I kissed him goodbye at the airport in April and told him to be safe, to come home to me. He called regularly for the first month. The connection was often poor, but he'd tell me about the base in Romania, about the young soldiers he was training, about how strange it felt to be teaching rather than doing. His emails were longer, more detailed, filled with small observations about the countryside, the food, the language barrier. He sounded happy. He sounded like Richard. Then in May, the calls became shorter, less frequent. When we did speak, he sounded distracted, tense. The emails stopped entirely. I told myself it was normal, that training schedules were probably intense, that he was busy. But there was a knot of anxiety in my stomach that wouldn't dissolve. In July, I received a call from the base commander at Fort Benning. Very brief, very professional. They wanted me to know that Richard's deployment had been extended by 6 weeks due to operational requirements. Nothing to worry about, purely administrative. I asked what operational requirements a training mission could possibly have. The commander's voice became cooler. I'm not at liberty to discuss mission details, Mrs. Mason. Your husband is safe. He'll be home in October as scheduled. But Richard didn't call to tell me about the extension himself. I had to wait 3 days before he finally contacted me, and when he did, his voice was hollow. I'm sorry you had to hear it from command. Things got complicated here. I can't really explain. But I'll be home soon, Helen. I promise. What got complicated? I can't talk about it. I'm sorry. That was the last real conversation we had before he came home. He called twice more in August, both times for less than 5 minutes, both times sounding like he was reading from a script. In September, he sent a single text message. Coming home, October 18th. Love you. October 18th arrived. I took the day off work, drove to the Louisville airport, stood in arrivals holding a welcome home sign like all the other military families. I watched soldiers reunite with their loved ones, crying, laughing, holding each other. Then I saw Richard. He looked like he'd aged 10 years. He'd lost at least 20 pounds, his face gaunt, his eyes sunken. But it was more than physical. Something fundamental had changed in the way he carried himself. The confidence, the quiet strength that had always defined him, it was gone. He looked hunted. I ran to him anyway, threw my arms around him, felt how thin he'd become beneath his uniform. Welcome home, I whispered against his chest. He hugged me back, but it felt mechanical, obligatory. Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming. Like I was a colleague, not his wife of 26 years. The drive home was silent except for my attempts at conversation. I asked about his flight, about Romania, about whether he was hungry, about his plans now that he was home. He answered in monosyllables, staring out the window at the Kentucky landscape passing by. When we pulled into our driveway, he looked at our house, this home we'd built together, like he was seeing a stranger's property. That first week home, he barely spoke 50 words to me. He slept fitfully, waking up gasping, drenched in sweat. He spent hours in our garage with the door locked, and when I knocked, asking if he was okay, he'd say he was fine, just organizing his gear. He flinched when I touched him unexpectedly. He stopped making eye contact. He moved through our house like a ghost. I tried to be patient. I'd been a military wife for 26 years. I understood PTSD, understood that combat changes people, that soldiers need time to decompress and readjust. But this felt different. This felt like Richard had left some essential part of himself in Romania and brought back only a shell. I suggested therapy. He refused. I suggested we talk to his former commander, a man named Colonel Peterson, who'd always had Richard's back. He became agitated, almost angry. Peterson can't help with this, Helen. Nobody can help with this. I just need time. On the 8th day he was home, I found him sitting in our garage at 2 a.m., his service pistol disassembled on his workbench, staring at the pieces. Not cleaning them, not working on them, just staring. I stood in the doorway watching him for 5 minutes before he noticed me. When he did, his expression was pure anguish. I'm sorry, he said. I'm so sorry, Helen. For what? Richard, talk to me. Tell me what happened over there. But he just shook his head and turned back to the gun parts. I can't. It's classified. You know I can't discuss missions. This isn't about protocol anymore. This is about you, about us, about our marriage. I know, and I'm sorry, but I can't. Not yet. 3 days later, on his 11th night home, he dug that hole in our backyard at 3 a.m. And now, on this Thursday morning, the smell of decomposition was seeping through our bedroom floor, and I understood with terrible clarity that whatever Richard had brought home from Romania wasn't just psychological trauma. It was something physical, something buried, something rotting, and my husband was terrified. The smell grew stronger over the next 3 days, and with it grew my certainty that I was living with a stranger who'd replaced my husband. Thursday morning, when I first noticed the odor, I mentioned it to Richard over breakfast. His reaction was immediate and carefully controlled. Too controlled. I don't smell anything, he said, not looking up from his coffee. Richard, it's unmistakable. Something died under the house or maybe in the crawl space. We need to call someone. There's nothing dead anywhere, Helen. You're stressed. You've been working too hard. His voice had that flat, reasonable quality that made my skin crawl. Maybe you should take a few days off. See your doctor about your anxiety. My anxiety. As if I was the problem. As if I was imagining the sweet, nauseating scent of decomposition that was growing stronger by the hour. By Friday afternoon, I couldn't stand being in our bedroom anymore. The smell was concentrated there, seeping up through the floorboards directly above where Richard had dug that hole. I moved my pillow and blanket to the guest room, told Richard I had a headache and needed space. He didn't argue. In fact, he looked relieved. That evening, our neighbor Margaret Chen knocked on our door. Margaret was 72, a retired English professor who lived in the house directly behind ours. She was holding a tin of homemade cookies and wearing an expression of polite concern. "Helen, dear, I hope I'm not overstepping, but I've been noticing an unusual odor coming from somewhere in this vicinity. I wondered if perhaps you'd noticed it as well." Before I could answer, Richard appeared behind me, all charm and deflection. "Margaret, how wonderful to see you. Yes, we've noticed it too. There's a dead raccoon under our back deck. I've been meaning to deal with it, but you know how these things are. I'll take care of it this weekend, I promise." Margaret smiled, but I saw the flicker of doubt in her eyes as she glanced past Richard to me. "Oh, well, that would be lovely. The smell is quite strong, especially in the evenings. Thank you for addressing it, Richard. And welcome home, by the way. Helen mentioned you'd been overseas." "Thank you. It's good to be back." After she left, Richard closed the door and turned to me. "Don't," he said quietly. "Don't talk about this with anyone." "Talk about what? The smell? Richard, she came here asking about it. What was I supposed to say?" "I handled it. It's handled. Just let it go, Helen." But I couldn't let it go, because that night, after Richard fell into his restless sleep around midnight, I went to the window and looked down at our backyard. Richard was on the back porch, sitting in one of our wicker chairs, staring at that patch of lawn. His service pistol was on the table beside him. He sat there for 3 hours, completely motionless except for his eyes scanning the darkness, and I realized with cold dread that he was keeping watch, guarding whatever he'd buried. Saturday morning, I did something I'd never done in 26 years of marriage. I violated Richard's privacy. While he was in the shower, I took his phone from the nightstand and tried to unlock it. He'd changed the passcode. Of course he had. But I knew Richard, knew his patterns, knew the dates that mattered to him. I tried our wedding anniversary. Nothing. I tried his mother's birthday. Nothing. Then I tried the date of his first deployment to Iraq, March 19th, 2003. The phone unlocked. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through his apps. Most of what I saw was normal. Weather, news, a fitness tracker. But there were apps I didn't recognize. Encrypted messaging services with names like Signal and Wicker. Apps that disappeared messages. Apps designed for people who needed secure communications. I opened Signal. There were dozens of messages, but they were all from numbers, no names attached. The most recent exchange was from 2 days ago. Unknown number. Package secure? Richard. Yes. Unknown number. Keep it that way. No contact until further notice. Richard. Understood. I took screenshots, sent them to my own phone, deleted the evidence of the texts I'd sent. My heart was hammering so hard I thought Richard would hear it over the shower. I scrolled further back. More cryptic messages, more numbers, more conversations that made no sense out of context. Then I found something in his photos, pictures he'd taken but never shown me. They were dated from August, during his deployment. The first photo showed Richard with 3 other men in desert fatigues. They were standing in what looked like a barren compound, concrete walls and harsh sunlight. None of them wore any insignia, no unit markings, nothing identifying. They looked like contractors, not regular military. The second photo was closer, focusing on one of the men. Someone had drawn a red circle around his face using the phone's editing feature. I zoomed in. The man was about 40, dark hair, hard eyes, strong jaw. There was something predatory about his expression. I screenshotted this too. The third photo made my blood run cold. It was an obituary, photographed from a laptop screen. Captain Derek Morrison, age 41, died in a training accident at a NATO facility in Romania on September 28, 2025. Survived by his wife Amanda and 2 children. Services to be held at Arlington National Cemetery. September 28th, 3 weeks before Richard came home. And this man, this Captain Morrison, was the same man whose face had been circled in red in that earlier photo. The shower turned off. I had maybe 90 seconds before Richard emerged. I kept scrolling frantically through his emails, found his banking app, opened it. My breath caught in my throat. There was an account I'd never seen before, registered in Richard's name at a bank in the Cayman Islands. The balance was $840,000. The deposit had been made on October 16th, 2 days before Richard came home. A single wire transfer from something called Meridian Solutions LLC. I took a screenshot, closed everything, put the phone back exactly where I'd found it, and walked out of our bedroom on legs that barely supported me. I made it to the guest bathroom before I vomited. My husband had $840,000 in an offshore account. A man he'd served with, or near, had died in Romania 3 weeks before Richard came home. Richard was receiving encrypted messages about keeping something secure, and something was decomposing in our backyard. I sat on the guest bathroom floor, my back against the cold tile, and forced myself to think like the hospital administrator I was. Evidence, patterns, logical conclusions. What did I know for certain? 1. Richard had changed fundamentally after this deployment, not just PTSD, something deeper, something that made him afraid. 2. He had buried something in our backyard at 3 a.m., something roughly the size and weight of a human body. 3. He had received a massive payment from an entity I'd never heard of, deposited in a secret offshore account. 4. A man he'd served with had died under suspicious circumstances, a training accident during what was supposed to be a safe advisory mission. 5. Someone was sending him encrypted messages about keeping a package secure. The conclusion was impossible. It was insane, but it was the only thing that fit all the facts. Richard had killed someone, or been involved in someone's death, and he'd brought evidence home, maybe the body itself, and buried it in our backyard. I spent the rest of Saturday in a fog of denial and terror. I went through the motions of normal life, grocery shopping, laundry, preparing meals. Richard barely spoke to me. He spent the day in the garage again, then on the porch keeping his vigil as darkness fell. I pretended to read in the living room, but I was researching on my laptop. Meridian Solutions LLC. It took me less than 20 minutes to find them. A private military contractor based in Alexandria, Virginia, specializing in security consultation and tactical advisory services. Their website was vague, corporate, filled with stock photos of serious-looking men in tactical gear. The kind of company that did work governments couldn't officially acknowledge. Sunday morning, the smell was unbearable. I woke up at 6 a.m. to find Richard already awake, sitting on the edge of the guest bed where I'd been sleeping. "We need to talk," he said. My mouth went dry. "Okay. I know you can smell it. I know you're not crazy, and I know I've been gaslighting you. I'm sorry for that." His voice was flat, emotionless. "I need you to trust me for just a little while longer. What's buried out there, it's not what you think." "What do I think it is, Richard?" He looked at me then, really looked at me for the first time since he'd come home. "You think I killed someone. You think I'm a murderer." I couldn't speak, couldn't confirm or deny. "I'm not, but I can't explain what's out there without putting you in danger. The less you know, the safer you are. Please, Helen, please just trust me." "I found your phone," I said quietly. "I saw the messages, the photos, the obituary. I saw the offshore account with $840,000 in it." His face went white. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, "You shouldn't have done that. I'm your wife. We've been married for 26 years. You've been home for 3 weeks, and you've barely spoken to me. You're keeping watch over something you buried in our yard. A man you served with is dead. Someone is paying you nearly $1 million to keep something secure. What did you expect me to do? I expected you to leave it alone." His voice rose for the first time, sharp with desperation. "I expected you to stay out of this, to stay safe, to let me handle it." "Handle what? Richard, what happened in Romania?" He stood up abruptly, paced to the window, stared out at the backyard. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "The mission wasn't what they told me. It wasn't a training exercise. We were sent to eliminate a target, a weapons dealer who'd been selling to terrorist cells. High-value target, sanctioned by no one officially, funded by private interests who wanted him gone but couldn't be seen ordering the hit. My heart was pounding. You killed him. We killed him. My team. It was supposed to be clean. In and out, no witnesses, no evidence. But his son was there. A kid, Helen, 16 years old. He saw everything. Richard's hands were gripping the windowsill so hard his knuckles were white. The team commander, Morrison, the man in that photo, he ordered the boy eliminated. No witnesses, no international incident. It was the practical call, the tactical call. Oh God, I refused. I said no. The kid was unarmed, terrified. He was a child. Morrison said if I didn't do it, he would. And if I interfered, I'd be eliminated too for compromising the mission. So I made a choice. The room was spinning. What choice? Richard turned to face me, and his eyes were haunted by something far worse than combat trauma. I shot Morrison. I killed my commanding officer to save that boy's life. The other 2 team members froze. They didn't know what to do. I told them to run, told them I'd handle it, told them to report it was a training accident. They could live with that story. They couldn't live with murdering a child. The body in our yard is Morrison's. I couldn't leave him there. The target's compound was being monitored by local authorities, by competing criminal factions. If Morrison's body was found, if an autopsy revealed he'd been shot by American ammunition, it would become an international incident. The mission would be exposed. The contractors who ordered it, Meridian Solutions, would be exposed. They'd eliminate everyone involved to cover their tracks, including me, including you. I couldn't breathe, couldn't process what I was hearing. The $840,000 was blood money. Meridian paid it to buy my silence about the illegal mission, about Morrison's death, about the entire operation. They told me to disappear the body, to keep my mouth shut, and to live with what I'd done. They told me if I ever spoke about it, they'd kill both of us and make it look like a murder-suicide by a PTSD-afflicted veteran. It's a story everyone would believe. So you brought a body home. You buried a man in our backyard. I didn't know what else to do. His voice cracked. I couldn't leave him there. I couldn't report it through official channels because the mission was illegal. I couldn't trust anyone in the chain of command because I didn't know how deep the corruption went. So I brought the only evidence that proves what really happened, and I buried it, and I've been trying to figure out what the hell to do next while keeping you safe and keeping myself sane. We stared at each other across the guest room, 26 years of marriage reduced to this moment of impossible truth. Where's the boy? I finally asked. The 16-year-old. Is he safe? I got him to the U.S. Embassy in Bucharest. I had a friend there, someone I trust from my first deployment. The kid's in witness protection now, somewhere safe. He's alive because I made that choice. And Morrison's family? His wife and 2 children? Richard's face crumpled. They think he died a hero in a training accident. They'll never know the truth. I took that from them along with everything else. The smell of decomposition filled the room, filled my lungs, filled my entire world. My husband had killed a man. He'd buried that man in our backyard. He was being paid to keep silent about war crimes, and the people who'd orchestrated all of it were powerful enough, connected enough, ruthless enough to make us both disappear if the truth ever came out. What are we going to do? I whispered. Richard sat back down on the bed, his head in his hands. I don't know, Helen. I've been sitting on that porch every night trying to figure it out. If we report it, we're dead. If we don't, I'm living with a corpse in my yard and blood money in my account. There's no good answer. There's no way out that doesn't destroy everything. I wanted to comfort him. I wanted to tell him we'd figure it out together. But I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but sit there drowning in the impossible reality of what our lives had become. Outside, Margaret Chen was walking her dog past our house. Birds were singing in our trees. Sunday morning in Ashland Hills, Kentucky, where everything looked normal and nothing would ever be normal again. I didn't speak to Richard for the rest of Sunday. I couldn't. Every time I looked at him, I saw both the man I'd loved for 26 years and a stranger who'd killed someone and buried the body in our backyard. The cognitive dissonance was paralyzing. I moved through our house like a ghost, and Richard gave me space, understanding that what he'd told me needed time to settle, to become real, to transform from impossible confession into lived reality. Monday evening, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. I couldn't sit in budget meetings and discuss hospital operations while a decomposing body lay 6 feet beneath my bedroom window. I spent the day researching military law, war crimes, private military contractors, witness protection protocols. The more I learned, the more I understood how trapped we were. Richard was right. There was no good answer. Tuesday night, I couldn't sleep. At 2 a.m., I got out of bed, pulled on jeans and a sweatshirt, and grabbed a garden spade from the garage. Richard was on the porch in his usual vigil, but he dozed off in the chair, his head tilted back, the pistol in his lap. I watched him for a moment. This man I'd married, this man who'd killed to save a child's life, this man who was drowning in impossible choices. Then I walked to that patch of lawn. The earth was still soft from Richard's digging 3 weeks ago. The spade sank in easily, and I worked quickly, quietly, my breath coming in sharp gasps, my heart hammering against my ribs. I didn't know what I was doing or why. I just needed to see it, needed to confirm that this nightmare was real, that there was actually a body down there, that my husband hadn't lost his mind and I hadn't lost mine along with him. 18 inches down, the spade hit plastic. The smell that erupted made me gag, made my eyes water, made every instinct scream at me to stop, to fill the hole back in, to run inside and pretend I'd never started digging. But I didn't stop. I scraped away more soil with shaking hands, pulled at the black plastic sheeting, and it tore open with a sound like ripping fabric. The smell was overwhelming, violent, a physical assault. I vomited into the grass beside the hole, then kept pulling at the plastic with dirt-covered hands, kept uncovering what Richard had hidden. In the moonlight, I saw it clearly. A human hand, gray-green with decomposition, the flesh beginning to separate from the bone. On one finger was a distinctive ring, gold with Arabic inscription etched around the band. I stared at that hand, at that ring, and something shifted inside me. This wasn't just Richard's burden anymore. This wasn't just his impossible choice, his moral injury, his descent into a nightmare he couldn't escape. I was part of it now. I'd dug up evidence. I'd seen the body. I'd crossed a line that meant there was no going back to ignorance, to plausible deniability, to the comfortable fiction that I could stay separate from whatever hell Richard had brought home. I heard movement behind me and spun around. Richard was standing at the edge of the porch, his face illuminated by the security light, staring at me kneeling beside the partially excavated grave. Our eyes met across the yard, and in that moment, I saw his fear transform into something else, resignation, or maybe relief that he was no longer alone in this. He walked toward me slowly, and when he reached the hole, he looked down at what I'd uncovered. "You shouldn't have done this, Helen." "I know." My voice sounded strange, hollow, but I needed to see it. I needed to know it was real. "It's real." He knelt beside me, looked at the decomposing hand, at the ring. That ring belonged to the target, the weapons dealer. Morrison was wearing it as a trophy when I shot him. I should have removed it before I buried him, but I wasn't thinking clearly. I just wanted him in the ground, wanted the evidence hidden, wanted to make this nightmare disappear. "The target's ring," I repeated slowly, my mind working through the implications. "So this proves Morrison was part of the kill team. This proves the mission happened." "Yes." "And Morrison's body proves you were there, proves you shot him." "Yes." I sat back on my heels, staring at that partially exposed grave, at the evidence of murder and self-defense and war crimes all tangled together in black plastic sheeting. And then something crystallized in my mind, something that had been forming since Richard's confession, something that had been growing through all my research, all my sleepless hours trying to find a way out of this impossible situation. "We need to call the police," I said quietly. Richard's head snapped toward me. "What? Helen, no. We can't. They'll kill us." "They're going to kill us anyway." I turned to face him, and my voice was steadier than I'd heard it in weeks. "Meridian Solutions can't afford to have you alive with this knowledge. That $840,000 wasn't payment. It was a test. They're waiting to see what you'll do, waiting to see if you'll keep silent or if you'll become a liability. And the moment they decide you're a liability, we're both dead. So we call the police, and then we're definitely dead." "No." I grabbed his arm, forced him to look at me. We call the police and we tell them everything. We give them the body, the evidence, the offshore account, the encrypted messages, the name of the boy you saved. We tell them about the illegal mission, about Meridian Solutions, about Morrison, about all of it. We go public before Meridian can silence us. Helen, you're not thinking clearly. The moment we do that, we have protection. We become witnesses in a federal investigation. Meridian can't make us disappear without drawing attention to exactly what they're trying to hide. Right now, we're easy targets. Two people with a secret, isolated, vulnerable. But if we go to the authorities, if we give them everything, we become too visible to kill quietly. Richard was shaking his head, but I could see the calculation in his eyes, the soldier's mind running through tactical options, weighing risks and outcomes. There's more, I continued, my words coming faster now, fueled by a clarity I hadn't felt since this nightmare began. I've been researching all day. I know people, Richard. I've been working at St. Mary's for 32 years. I sit on the hospital board with Judge Patricia Reynolds. Her son is a federal prosecutor. I know Sarah Mitchell from our fundraising committee. Her husband is an investigative journalist at the Washington Post. I have connections, relationships, people who will believe me when I tell them this story. You'd be destroying my career, my reputation, everything I've built. Your career is already destroyed. Your reputation is already gone. You killed your commanding officer and buried him in our backyard. That's our reality now. My voice softened. But you killed him to save an innocent boy's life. You refused an illegal order to murder a child. That matters, Richard. That's the story we tell. Not a war criminal covering up crimes. A soldier who chose honor over orders, who saved a life, who's being threatened by the people who wanted that boy dead. Richard stared at the exposed grave, at Morrison's decomposing hand, at the physical evidence of the choice he'd made. If we do this, there's no taking it back. If we don't do this, we're waiting to die, or waiting to become the people who cover up war crimes and murder. I took his hand, felt how cold his fingers were. I didn't marry a man who could live with that, and I'm not a woman who can live with it either. He was silent for a long moment. Then, finally, he nodded. Okay, we call the police. We tell them everything. I pulled out my phone, and my hands were remarkably steady as I dialed 911. But before I pressed the call button, I did one more thing. I opened my cloud storage and accessed all the evidence I'd gathered. The video of Richard digging, the screenshots from his phone, the research on Meridian Solutions. I shared it with 3 people: Judge Reynolds' personal email, Sarah Mitchell's journalist husband, and my own attorney. If something happened to us in the next few hours, the truth would still get out. Then I pressed call. 911. What's your emergency? I took a breath, and when I spoke, my voice was clear and calm. The voice of a hospital administrator who'd spent 3 decades making critical decisions under pressure. My name is Helen Mason. I'm calling from 4782 Woodland Drive in Ashland Hills. I need to report a body buried in my backyard, and I need immediate protection. My husband is a military veteran who witnessed war crimes, and we're both in danger from a private military contractor. We have evidence, and we're ready to cooperate fully. Please send police and request federal investigators. This is a matter of national security. The operator's voice sharpened with urgency. Ma'am, stay on the line. Units are being dispatched now. Are you in immediate danger? I looked at Richard, at the partially excavated grave, at our house where we'd built 26 years of marriage, at the neighborhood where everything had always seemed so safe and normal. Yes, I said. We've been in danger since the moment my husband came home from war, but we're not hiding anymore. The first police car arrived in 7 minutes. I counted every second, standing in our backyard with Richard beside me and my phone still connected to the 911 operator. The blue and red lights painted our colonial house in alternating colors, transforming our quiet neighborhood into a crime scene. Within 15 minutes, there were 6 police vehicles, and our neighbors were emerging from their homes in bathrobes and pajamas, standing on their porches watching the drama unfold at the Mason house. 2 officers approached with flashlights, their hands resting on their weapons. The younger one, maybe 30 years old with a crew cut that screamed military background, spoke first. Mrs. Mason, I'm Officer Bryant. We received your call about a body? Yes. I gestured to the partially excavated hole at our feet, at Morrison's exposed hand with its distinctive ring catching the flashlight beam. That's Captain Derek Morrison, U.S. Army. He was killed in Romania on September 28th in what was reported as a training accident. My husband brought his body home because it's evidence of an illegal mission sanctioned by a private military contractor called Meridian Solutions. Officer Bryant's flashlight moved from the grave to Richard. Sir, I need you to step away from the excavation site and put your hands where I can see them. Richard complied immediately, the muscle memory of a career soldier following orders. I'm armed, service pistol in my waistband, right side. I'm going to slowly remove it and place it on the ground. Do it very slowly, sir. I watched my husband disarm himself with careful, deliberate movements, while 3 more officers converged on our backyard. One of them, a woman in her 40s with sergeant stripes, was already on her radio calling for detectives and the coroner. Another was photographing the scene with his phone. The situation was escalating exactly as I'd known it would. No turning back now. No way to undo what we'd set in motion. Mrs. Mason, I need you to step over here, the sergeant said, guiding me away from both the grave and Richard. Officer Bryant is going to secure your husband while we sort this out. Can you tell me again what you said on the 911 call about national security? I took a breath and began explaining. I told her about Richard's deployment, about the black operation, about Morrison's death, about the 16-year-old boy Richard had saved, about Meridian Solutions and their $840,000 payment. I told her about the encrypted messages, about the offshore account, about the 3 weeks Richard had spent guarding this grave while deteriorating into a shadow of himself. And I told her about my fear that we'd both be eliminated if we didn't go public immediately. The sergeant's expression shifted from skeptical to deeply concerned as I spoke. Ma'am, these are serious allegations involving military operations and private contractors. This is beyond local police jurisdiction. I'm calling in the FBI. Good, I said. That's exactly what needs to happen. But I need you to understand, the moment we made that 911 call, we became targets. Meridian Solutions has resources, connections. They can't afford to let my husband testify about what happened in Romania. We'll protect you, she said, but I could hear the uncertainty in her voice. She was a small-town police sergeant dealing with something far beyond her usual scope. Richard was being handcuffed now, for everyone's safety, Officer Bryant explained, just procedure until they understood the situation. My husband stood there with his hands behind his back, and I saw something in his face I hadn't seen since he came home. Not fear or guilt or desperation. Relief. The crushing weight of carrying this secret alone was finally lifting, even if it meant being arrested, even if it meant everything that would come next. By 3:30 a.m., our backyard looked like a scene from a crime procedural. Portable lights had been set up, illuminating the excavation site. A detective named Morrison, no relation, he'd assured us with dark irony, had arrived and was coordinating with the coroner's office. They'd fully exposed the body now, photographing everything, documenting the plastic sheeting, the decomposition, the ring, the bullet wounds in Morrison's chest. Richard was sitting in the back of a police car, uncuffed but not free to leave. I was sitting on our back porch with a blanket around my shoulders, giving my statement to Detective Morrison for the 3rd time. Mrs. Mason, I need you to be very clear about the timeline. Your husband came home October 18th. You witnessed him burying something on October 29th. You didn't report it until tonight, November 18th. That's 3 weeks. Help me understand why you waited. Because I didn't know what he'd buried. I suspected, but I didn't have confirmation until tonight when I dug it up myself. And because my husband told me that reporting it would get us both killed by the people who orchestrated the illegal mission, I needed to have a strategy, needed to have protections in place before I called you. What protections? Before I called 911, I uploaded all the evidence, video, screenshots, research, to cloud storage and shared it with a federal judge, an investigative journalist, and my attorney. If anything happens to me or my husband, that information goes public automatically. I made us too visible to disappear quietly. Detective Morrison studied me with something that looked like respect. You're either very smart or you've been watching too many crime shows. I'm a hospital vice president. I've spent 32 years managing crises and protecting people. This is just a different kind of crisis management. At 4:15 a.m., 2 FBI agents arrived in a black SUV. Special Agent Rebecca Torres was late 40s, sharp-eyed, with the bearing of someone who'd seen every variation of human corruption. Her partner, Special Agent James Chen, was younger, quieter, but I could see the intelligence working behind his careful expression. They spoke briefly with Detective Morrison, examined the excavation site, looked at Richard sitting in the police car, and then Torres approached me on the porch. "Mrs. Mason, I'm Special Agent Torres. I understand you have evidence related to illegal military operations conducted by Meridian Solutions, a private contractor." "Yes, it's all documented and backed up in multiple locations, but I need something from you first." Her eyebrow raised. "You're not really in a position to negotiate, ma'am." "I disagree. You need my cooperation and my husband's testimony to build a case against Meridian. Without us, you have a body and no context. With us, you have a witness to war crimes, evidence of conspiracy to commit murder, proof of illegal military operations, and a 16-year-old boy in witness protection who can corroborate everything. So yes, I am in a position to negotiate." A small smile played at Torres's lips. "What do you want?" "Protection. Real protection. Not just promises. I want us in federal custody, not local jail. I want witness protection protocols activated immediately. And I want immunity for my husband for Morrison's death and for transporting the body. He killed in self-defense to save an innocent child from being murdered on illegal orders. Everything he did after that was an attempt to survive and protect evidence. That's a lot to ask for someone who's been concealing a body for 3 weeks. It's a small price to pay for taking down a contractor that's been conducting illegal assassinations with zero oversight." I met her eyes directly. "And we both know Meridian Solutions isn't going to let this stop with one mission. If they did this in Romania, they've done it elsewhere. My husband's testimony opens the door to a much larger investigation. That's what I'm offering you." Torres studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Wait here." She walked to the police car where Richard was sitting, spoke to him through the open door for several minutes, then returned with Agent Chen. They conferred quietly, made several phone calls, and finally Torres came back to me. "Okay, Mrs. Mason, here's what's going to happen. You and your husband are being taken into federal custody immediately. You'll be transported to a secure FBI facility in Louisville, where you'll give full statements. A U.S. attorney will be assigned to this case by morning. Based on your husband's cooperation and the circumstances you've described, we'll recommend immunity for Morrison's death and related charges. But I need everything. All the evidence you've collected, all the passwords to those cloud accounts, full cooperation with the investigation. You'll have it, but I need one more thing. Mrs. Mason, the boy, the 16-year-old my husband saved. I need confirmation that he's safe, that Meridian doesn't know where he is, and that protecting him is part of this investigation." Torres exchanged a glance with Chen. "The boy is in U.S. Marshals protection. He's safe, and yes, his testimony will be crucial to this case." I felt something unclench in my chest. "Then you have my full cooperation." At 5:30 a.m., as dawn was breaking over Ashland Hills, Richard and I were placed in separate FBI vehicles. Before they closed my door, I caught his eye across the driveway. He mouthed 2 words. "Thank you." I nodded, and then we were being driven away from the house we'd shared for 18 years, from the neighborhood where we'd built our life, from everything familiar into a future I couldn't begin to predict. The FBI facility in Louisville was austere. Concrete walls, fluorescent lights, the institutional smell of government buildings everywhere. They separated us immediately. I spent 6 hours giving my statement to Torres and Chen, walking them through every detail from the moment Richard came home to the moment I called 911. I showed them the video of Richard digging. I gave them access to all my cloud storage, all my screenshots, all my research. I provided names, dates, financial information, everything I'd compiled during those desperate weeks of investigation. Around noon, Torres brought me coffee and a sandwich I couldn't eat. "Your husband's story matches yours exactly. Same timeline, same details, same descriptions of the mission and Morrison's death. That consistency helps your case considerably. It's the truth. That helps more than consistency. We've started investigating Meridian Solutions. Preliminary findings suggest they've been operating as an unregulated private military force for at least 5 years, conducting missions that the U.S. government officially knows nothing about. If your husband's testimony holds up, this is going to be a major scandal. Good. Then maybe Morrison's death won't be completely meaningless. Maybe the boy Richard saved won't be the only life spared by exposing these people. Torres sat across from me, her expression softening slightly. For what it's worth, Mrs. Mason, I think you did the right thing. What your husband did in Romania, refusing that order, saving that kid, that took real courage. Bringing it to light took courage too. A lot of people would have just tried to forget, to move on, to protect themselves. I'm not protecting myself. I'm protecting my husband from the people who'd rather he'd murdered a child than expose their corruption. There's a difference. At 3 p.m., a U.S. attorney named David Brennan arrived with news. Mr. and Mrs. Mason, based on the preliminary evidence and your cooperation, my office is prepared to offer the following arrangement. Richard Mason will receive full immunity for the death of Captain Morrison and related charges, contingent on his complete testimony against Meridian Solutions and any individuals involved in ordering or conducting illegal military operations. You'll both be placed in witness protection until the trial. Meridian Solutions assets are being frozen as of this afternoon, and arrest warrants are being prepared for their executive team and the 2 surviving members of Richard's team in Romania. I felt tears burning in my eyes for the first time since this nightmare began. What about Morrison's family? His wife and children? Brennan's expression grew somber. They'll be informed of the truth. It won't be easy for them. They've been living with the hero narrative for 6 weeks, learning that their husband and father was killed while attempting to murder a child, that he was part of an illegal operation. That's going to destroy them. I know, but they deserve the truth. Everyone deserves the truth. At 6 p.m., they finally let me see Richard. We met in a small conference room, an agent standing outside the door giving us privacy. He looked exhausted, hollowed out, but somehow lighter than he'd been in 3 weeks. When I sat down across from him, he reached for my hand. I'm so sorry, Helen. I'm sorry I brought this into our home, into our lives. I'm sorry I made you part of this nightmare. You didn't make me part of it. I chose to be part of it when I dug up that grave. I chose to be part of it when I called 911. Those were my decisions. I squeezed his hand. You saved a boy's life, Richard. You refused to murder a child. Whatever else happens, whatever consequences come from this, you did the right thing in Romania. I killed a man. I buried him in our backyard. I took blood money. I lied to you for 3 weeks. You killed a man who was about to commit murder. You protected evidence that will expose criminal conspiracy. You survived impossible circumstances, the only way you knew how. And now we're setting it right, together. He pulled me into his arms then, and I felt him shaking, felt 26 years of marriage and 3 weeks of hell and 1 impossible choice in Romania, all collapsing into this moment. We held each other in that sterile government conference room while the FBI built their case, while Meridian Solutions scrambled to contain the damage, while Morrison's family prepared to learn the truth, while a 16-year-old boy somewhere in witness protection breathed easier knowing the men who wanted him dead were being arrested. What happens to us now? Richard whispered against my hair. Now we testify. We tell the truth. We let the system work. And then, if we survive this, we figure out how to build a life again. I pulled back to look at him. It won't be the life we had. That's gone. But maybe we can build something new, something honest, something we can both live with. I don't deserve you. You deserve someone who believes in you, even when you can't believe in yourself. You deserve someone who will fight for the truth even when it's terrifying. That's what marriage means, Richard. Not just the good times. The impossible times, too. Agent Torres knocked on the door then. Time's up. We're moving you both to a secure location for the night. Tomorrow you'll begin formal depositions. This is going to be a long process. Richard and I stood, still holding hands. As they led us out to separate vehicles again, I looked back at the FBI facility, at the concrete and fluorescent lights and institutional efficiency of federal law enforcement. Somewhere in that building was evidence of the worst night of my husband's life, and evidence of the moment he chose honor over orders, chose life over obedience, chose to be the man I'd married rather than the soldier someone else wanted him to be. It wasn't redemption, not yet, but it was the beginning of something. Truth, maybe, or justice, or simply the chance to stop hiding from the impossible choice Richard had made in a war zone half a world away, the choice he'd buried in our backyard, the choice that had almost buried us both. The trial took 14 months. 14 months of depositions, testimonies, media circuses, and living in witness protection under names that weren't ours in a small apartment in Omaha that felt nothing like home. Richard testified for 6 days, describing in excruciating detail the mission in Romania, Morrison's order to kill the 16-year-old boy, the moment he chose to pull the trigger on his commanding officer instead. The boy, whose real name I still don't know, whose face I've never seen, testified via video link from an undisclosed location. His testimony corroborated everything Richard said, and when the jury heard a teenager describe watching American soldiers kill his father and then argue about whether to kill him too, the courtroom went silent. The evidence was overwhelming. Meridian Solutions had conducted 47 illegal operations over 5 years, resulting in the deaths of at least 200 people, including 63 civilians. Morrison had been involved in 12 of those operations. The 2 surviving members of Richard's team turned state's evidence immediately, confirming every detail of Richard's account. Meridian's CEO and 4 executives were convicted on charges ranging from conspiracy to commit murder to violations of the Geneva Conventions. The sentences ranged from 25 years to life. Richard received full immunity as promised. He was given a general discharge from the Army rather than dishonorable, a small mercy that acknowledged the impossible situation he'd faced. The $840,000 in blood money was seized by the government, and honestly, I was relieved. Neither of us could have lived with that money knowing where it came from, what it represented. Morrison's wife Amanda attended every day of the trial. I saw her sitting 3 rows behind the prosecution, her face carved from stone, aging visibly as the truth about her husband emerged piece by piece. On the final day, after the verdicts were read, she approached me in the courthouse hallway. I'd been dreading this confrontation for 14 months. "Mrs. Mason," she said quietly. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were devastated. "I need you to know something." I braced myself for her rage, her grief, her accusation that my husband had murdered hers. Instead, she said, "Thank you for telling the truth. My children and I have been living a lie for over a year. Derek wasn't the man I thought he was. He wasn't the father my children believed in. Learning that has been," her voice cracked, "it's been unbearable. But living with a false hero would have been worse. You gave us the truth. That's a terrible gift, but it's still a gift." I couldn't speak. Couldn't find words adequate to the moment. "I'm not saying I forgive your husband," she continued. "I don't know if I can. Derek is still dead. My children still lost their father. But he lost himself long before that night in Romania. He became something I don't recognize, and if your husband hadn't stopped him, an innocent boy would be dead too. I have to live with that complexity for the rest of my life." She walked away then, and I never saw her again. But her words stayed with me, a reminder that there are no clean endings to stories like ours, no simple villains and heroes, just people making impossible choices and living with impossible consequences. Richard and I left witness protection in March of 2027. We'd been granted new identities if we wanted them, but we declined. We were done hiding. We'd sold our house in Ashland Hills. No one wanted to buy the property where a body had been buried, so we took a substantial loss. We couldn't go back to Kentucky anyway. Too many memories, too much media attention, too many neighbors who looked at us with mixtures of sympathy and suspicion. We moved to Bozeman, Montana, a place neither of us had lived before, a place with no history. We bought a small ranch house on 2 acres outside of town, with the money from selling our colonial and my retirement savings from St. Mary's. I'd resigned my position as vice president of operations after the trial began. Mutual agreement that my presence was too disruptive, too much of a distraction. 32 years of hospital administration ended with a severance package and a handshake. Richard entered intensive therapy for PTSD and moral injury. Twice a week for 18 months, He sat with a psychologist who specialized in treating veterans who'd experienced catastrophic ethical breaches. Slowly, painfully, he began processing not just that night in Romania, but 26 years of accumulated trauma from 3 deployments, from all the things he'd seen and done in service of his country. He joined a veterans crisis center as a volunteer, talking to other soldiers struggling with the weight of combat, the impossible calculus of survival, the gap between military values and military reality. I found consulting work with hospital systems, mostly remote, helping them improve operations and crisis management protocols. The pay was a fraction of what I'd earned at St. Mary's, but it was enough. We lived simply now. No expensive lawn maintenance, no country club memberships, no keeping up appearances for neighbors. Just the 2 of us trying to figure out how to be married after everything that had broken between us. The marriage didn't survive intact. How could it? 6 months after we moved to Montana, we sat at our kitchen table and acknowledged that the people who'd made vows 26 years ago no longer existed. Richard had become someone who'd killed to save a life and would carry that weight forever. I'd become someone who dug up a grave, called the police on her husband, and forced us both into a truth that destroyed everything we'd built. We filed for divorce in September 2027. It was quiet, amicable, necessary, but we didn't separate. We continued living together in that ranch house, continued sharing meals and conversations, and the slow work of healing. We'd become something other than husband and wife, partners maybe, or survivors, or simply 2 people bound by the worst experience of their lives who couldn't imagine navigating the aftermath alone. Richard still has nightmares. I still wake sometimes at 3 a.m. and check to make sure he's not digging holes in our property. We're both in therapy. We both carry scars that will never fully heal, but we're building something new from the ruins of what we lost. It's smaller, quieter, more honest. We don't promise forever anymore. We just promise today, and tomorrow if we make it that far. The boy Richard saved, I learned his name eventually, Kareem. He's 19 now, living somewhere in the American Midwest under witness protection, attending community college, building a life that wouldn't exist if my husband hadn't refused that order. The U.S. attorney sent us a letter from him 6 months after the trial. It said simply, "Thank you for saving my life. I will make it worth saving." That letter hangs on our refrigerator, a reminder of why we endured everything we endured, why telling the truth mattered even when it cost us everything. The congressional hearings that followed the trial led to new oversight regulations for private military contractors. Meridian Solutions was dissolved, its assets seized, its operations shut down permanently. The investigation uncovered 3 other contractors operating with similar impunity. Reforms were implemented. Laws were strengthened. It won't prevent every atrocity, but maybe it will prevent some. Maybe Kareem won't be the only life saved by what Richard did, by what we both did when we stopped hiding and started telling the truth. I'm 60 years old now. Richard is 63. We're not the people we were, and we never will be again. But we're still here, still breathing, still trying to make sense of a world where good people sometimes have to do terrible things, where the right choice can destroy your life, where loving someone means standing beside them even when they bring home a war zone buried in plastic sheeting. Some nights, we sit on our back porch, a different state, a different life, and watch the Montana sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. Richard doesn't keep watch anymore. He doesn't scan the darkness for threats. He just sits, and I sit beside him, and we exist in the aftermath of impossible choices. Last week, Richard said something that made me understand we're going to be okay, eventually. We were washing dishes together, that mundane domestic ritual we've maintained through everything, and he turned to me and said, "I think I'm ready to forgive myself. Not for killing Morrison. I'll never fully forgive that. But for being human enough to make an impossible choice and survive it. I think I can forgive that." I took his hand, soapy water and all, and said, "I forgave you the moment I called 911. Now you just need to catch up. We're not a fairy tale. We're not even a traditional happy ending. But we're honest now in a way we never were before, when our marriage was built on the comfortable lie that some things should stay buried. We learned the hard way that truth is more important than comfort, that integrity matters more than safety, that sometimes love means destroying everything you've built together so you can survive what's underneath. The smell of decomposition is gone from our lives now, but the memory remains. It reminds me that secrets rot, that denial festers, that the only way through impossible situations is straight through them, no matter how much it hurts. It reminds me that I'm stronger than I ever knew, that my husband is more complex than I ever imagined, and that marriage isn't about staying the same people forever. It's about choosing each other again and again, even when everything changes, especially when everything changes. We're building a new kind of life here in Montana, Richard and I. It's quieter than our old life, smaller, more deliberate. We're not trying to recapture what we lost. We're trying to create something neither of us could have imagined back when we were young and in love and believed that honor was simple, that choices were clear, that war stayed on battlefields where it belonged. We know better now. War comes home. Choices are never clear. Honor sometimes requires destroying everything you thought you knew about yourself. But we're still here, still together, in whatever form that takes. Still breathing, still healing, still learning how to live with what we've done and what was done to us. And some days, that's enough. Some days, that's everything.